Sara Saraya Vacha Sarojamalam Gita Taganto Katam Nanakya Naka Kesharam Hari Kata Sambodhana Bodhitam Loke Sajana Satpade Ahara Pepi Amanam Muda Bhuyad Bharata Pankajam Kalimala Pradvam Shina Shreyase. May this lotus of the Mahabharata, born in the lake of the words of the son of Parasara, that is Vyasa, sweet with the fragrance of the meaning of Gita, with many stories as its stamens, fully opened by the discourses on Hari, the destroyer of the sins of Kali, and drunk joyously, day by day, by the bees of good men in the world, may it become the bestower of good to us. So today I'm going to, this is like part 2 on the mind in the Bhagavad Gita, but I'm going to be bringing other things in besides Bhagavad Gita. So I want to do a reminder, several reminders before we get into sort of the meat of it. In verse 3 of chapter 7 in the Gita, Krishna says, "Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. Of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth." So I want to just emphasize that the attainment of the ultimate goal is going to elude most of us, but there is a lot that can be achieved until that point. So the real task is to alter our self-identity and ultimately to eliminate the individual self altogether. So that's the ultimate goal. Now, most of us are not going to reach that, but that shouldn't hold us back, because Krishna has a lot of assurances, some of which are going to show up later on, that even the practice of some of what he's teaching is helpful, very helpful. Okay, so we need to eliminate the mind, or rather the ceaseless functioning that we call mind. So I have some, I think they're gems from Swami Ashokananda that I'm going to read out. They're rather long, and I kind of apologize for that, but he's coming always from the ultimate standpoint. So this is what he has to say about the mysterious ways of the mind. And he's going to start with a critique of Western psychology, because now remember, he was probably speaking in like the 1960s, and psychology was kind of in a heyday back then. Since then we've had transpersonal psychology and some other things that come along, but he's speaking before that, and this is under the moniker of what they called modern psychology. In the West, there has been a great deal of misinterpretation and misunderstanding about what the mind is and about how it should be controlled and directed in order that our best interests as persons can be served. But historically, it can be said in general that wherever there has been a growth of spiritual knowledge or knowledge of God, there has also been a growth of the knowledge of the mind in its totality. Modern psychology often suffers from ignorance of this basic knowledge of the mind, and so you find many strange things being taught even by intelligent psychologists. I think it would not be wrong to say that the majority of psychologists of the present day have given a peculiar turn to human life, if I may say so, an earthly turn. They think that the mind should learn to adjust itself to what is called the reality of this life. If the mind turns away from that reality, then the mind becomes abnormal. To my uninformed mind, it seems that any interpretation of mental phenomena always presupposes many things that belong to the realm of philosophy. First, for instance, you have to have a sense of value. Only then does interpretation become possible. How can you tell a person to train his mind in a certain way unless you think that the result of such training is really desirable? And who told you that if you adjust yourself to everything around you, you will achieve anything or arrive anywhere? Everybody knows that the majority are ignorant. Only a handful of people are possessed of truth or of some truth. Most of us are totally ignorant. How can I, in all conscience, ask a person to adjust himself to the majority? It would mean asking him to become foolish. You see, there are these strange things in modern psychology. So whatever suggestions I make, therefore, in the course of this talk, are to be taken as very preliminary kind of exercises, perhaps to train the mind to behave. This isn't to eliminate the mind. That is the ultimate goal. Now, in chapter 2, verse 41 of the Gita, Krishna says, "To the firm in mind, there is in this but one decision. Many branching and endless are the decisions of the infirm in mind." So, from the Bhagavad Gita, there are a couple of examples right within, from the Mahabharata, which incorporates the Bhagavad Gita within it. There are a couple of examples of both of these kinds of minds. So the infirm in mind, the primary example, I think, would be the blind king Dhritarashtra. He's a strong man, but he's blind. And he was passed over for kingship until his brother, the second brother, died, and then he got the kingship. And he has a lot of ambition for his, say, dynasty. Okay, so he tended to, what shall I say, he did not chastise his son, Duryodhana, who was the main bad guy in the whole story of the Mahabharata. He just kind of tried to placate him, let him have his own way, which turned out to be absolutely the wrong thing to do, because he was of an evil bent of mind, and the blind king did not want to do anything to, what should we say, jeopardize his lineage going forward into the future. However, the Pandavas had a more of a claim to the throne than his son did, because they had been the sons of the previous king. So anyway, a lot of things happened. There was a crooked dice game. There was they tried to burn the Pandavas out in a house made of lacquer. There was a second dice game that was also rigged. And then there was followed by the disrobing of Draupadi, who was the common wife of the 5 Pandava brothers. And each time one of these things happened, with the terrible consequences that went along with it, like Yudhishthira losing his kingdom in the dice game, which was rigged, this king, Dhritarashtra, reversed the decision. They would set up a scenario, and then that would happen, and then he would reverse the decision. So he was always flip-flopping. He knew it looked bad, okay, and so he would reverse it, but he let it happen to begin with. So this fellow Dhritarashtra is a real piece of work, let me tell you. He sort of repented at the end of the war, but then the Pandavas showed up, and he was, going to greet them, whatever, afterwards, and he was actually still so full of rage, that, particularly against Bhima, who was the second Pandava brother, that they knew he was going to try something. So when he went to embrace Bhim, they put a statue there, like, I don't know, marble statue or something. So he embraced it and he broke it to pieces, okay? Because he was still just, full of rage about the whole situation. And the Pandavas had won in the end anyway. So Dhritarashtra is the example of an many-branching, vacillating mind. Now, on the other hand, a mind that is firm, a firm mind, again, from the Mahabharata, is this character Shikandi. Shikandi had been, in a previous birth, Amba, a young woman who, together with her two sisters, was abducted by Bhishma to become the wives of his nephew, and who was the king, who was of Hastinapur. And so he abducted these three girls. This was a typical thing they used to do back then. I mean, it was, like, no big deal. They would just carry off princesses and stuff like that. Anyway, so he didn't know, though, that this Amba had already been promised to another guy, another prince who she wanted to marry. So when he found out, he sent her back. But the prince wouldn't take her back. It was like she was, like impure now or something. So this went back and forth a few times, and then finally she just really took it upon herself. She went into the forest or the mountains or someplace and did austerities for a long time so that she could be reborn and get revenge on Bhishma, which happened. Okay, so she becomes, in her next life, the warrior Shikandi. And Shikandi is really one-pointed. There's one thing and one thing only that he wants, and that is to kill Bhishma. Okay, so you see in the film that they have of the Mahabharata, you see these these little interludes where Shikandi is like sharpening the arrows and stuff like that. And it turns out that in the story, and just kind of like, getting ready, and it turns out that Shikandi actually used poisoned arrows. We're the only one that did that. So part of the whole process in his mind was, he's, one way or another, I'm going to kill Bhishma. So he was very one-pointed. I'm not saying it was a wonderful way to be one-pointed. I'm just saying there was one and only thing on his mind. So, and he did, ultimately, what happened is that Arjuna put him in his chariot, and Bhishma refused to fight with women, and he still considered Shikandi a woman since he knew who she had been, okay? And so Shikandi actually brought down Bhishma. He did not kill Bhishma because Bhishma had a boon that he could die whenever he wished. So he actually lingered for quite some period of time. But anyway, so here's Shikandi, very one-pointed. Okay, so that's two types of minds right from the Mahabharata, the one-pointed and the branching and endless vacillating type of mind. Now, in some previous talks, I said some things that I want to expand upon or explain, or I should say clarify, just so that people don't misunderstand. I said at one point, content is not important, but process is. And that is true largely, but it depends on where you are in this whole endeavor. Okay, so the reason I said this is because we get bogged down or affixed to what the mind is showing us. We need to figure out, therefore, how the mind works, that is, its processes, and because we know that the mind is inconsistent, its content changes constantly, and it's impermanent. So we need to cut off its functioning to a large extent. So in order to, I want to bring to the fore the ultimate goal first, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about some of the more shall we say, everyday affairs that we have to deal with. This is a continuation of Ashokananda. I'm sorry it's rather long, but I think it's important. Again, the mysterious ways of the mind. Greater knowledge of the mind is not to be had through the study of books, for even now in India, the oral tradition is given a greater place. And why is that? Because the teacher, if the student comes and says, oh, this is what's happening, how can I handle it? The teacher gives instructions. You can't really get that out of a book, because the book is, you're not going to find your exact problem necessarily. Where a subtle mind must be at play, the oral tradition is the only one worthwhile. What we in India call philosophy is nothing but a systematic statement of facts. You see, we do not speculate, we practice, we experience, and that experience forms the basis of our philosophy. We say we are right because our statements never have contradicted any other system that is based on experience. So I shall begin by giving a very brief idea of the philosophical background of the Indian concepts of the mind. First of all, we maintain that the mind is not necessary, that it is really a nuisance. Through some inadvertence, we have become victims of the mind. We have become attached to it, but it does not contribute anything at all. If you ask, how is it then that we got involved in the mind? There must have been some purpose in it. I shall ask, how can you assume that there is a purpose in a mistake? That is the equivalent of saying it is not a mistake. But we do make mistakes all the time. As I have said, the majority of us are ignorant. Our present state, in which we find our mind thrashing about so much, is a state of ignorance. And since this is so, then the mind itself must be a product of ignorance, or at least an ally of ignorance. Well, as it happens, in our present state, we seem to be somehow associated with the mind and body, and outside of us we see a vast universe extended. Our own being, or what we are inclined to say, the self, is a spiritual substance. It is not mind. It is not the body. It is perfect, and it exists in its own glory. It does not have to borrow glory from anywhere else. Glory and effulgence are its very nature. The Atman, or self, is the light of lights, and it is ever shining. Because spiritual life is the life that is dedicated to the finding of eternal truth, final truth, religion is not one of many functions of a man, coordinated with his other functions, not at all. All other functions are functions in error, whereas religion is the finding of truth. And in religion and spiritual endeavor, the great teachers always say, discover your inner consciousness, make the mind subtle and high, quiet the mind, and then only will you find spiritual truth. If I take the position of a person of average knowledge, I would say that I know very little, and whatever I do know is not true knowledge, it is confused knowledge. Patanjali, the author of the Yoga Sutras, begins his book by saying this. Explaining what yoga means, he says in the second aphorism, where there is not the slightest movement of the mind, that is the state of yoga. If you ask, what is this mysterious state in which the mind stops functioning altogether, he says, there the seer or the perceiver, that is to say the subject, the conscious being, exists in his own true state. That is the highest state. Patanjali does not say, there one knows God, but only that there the knower, that is to say, you or I, exists in his own true nature. So that's the ultimate goal. And now we're going to talk about where we really are, most of us. So when we're trying to eliminate thought, the content relatively is not important. Because, why? Because you waste time in determining whether it is bad, and then you label it, and then thus you have had to look at it, and you open yourself to dwell on it, and then you get sidetracked. Isn't this kind of what happens? That's a bad thought, so I don't want to think that, but I'm thinking that. and it's taking me somewhere. Okay, so no. At this stage is when all thought is counterproductive. So this is, we talked about housekeeping last time, cleaning up the mind, getting it to behave, getting it to do what it's supposed to do. Only once the mind has attained a certain tranquility can you successfully begin to reprogram it. Okay, you've reached a certain amount of tranquility. That's when you introduce these positive, affirming images, and you begin to build an entirely new self-identification. One that is based on the truth of your inner nature, not the distorted image that the worldly life has previously created for you. At that time, affirming constructive thought can be very productive. So you see what we're saying here? Okay, it's not that, but in the beginning, it's all pretty much you don't want to go there. So when meditating, just a couple of suggestions. You don't look at the thoughts because they'll distract you, they'll take you away. You look through them or around them. Somehow or over them, you have to somehow get beyond them, okay? So it's kind of like that thought has to become sort of transparent, and you're looking beyond to find your true nature. And you can also at that point ask yourself, well, who is the thinker? Because you're looking for the thinker. You're not looking for any content of any thought. You're looking for who is generating this? Where is this coming from? So the thoughts cannot be you, or I should say, these thoughts come unbidden. They just come up. You're not telling the thoughts, okay, now I'm going to do this, think this, that, and the other. They just come up. So finding out who the thinker is just remind yourself of that every once in a while. And then the other thing is, I mentioned staring it down last time. Now, how do you stare it down? You stare through it as if it's a non-entity. You barely acknowledge that it's there. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, I'm sure you've kind of, it's when you zone out to other things, you're looking at something, but that's how you look at these thoughts. You're disinterested in it. You don't want to be thinking that thought while you're trying to meditate. So that stare dissolves over time the obstacles, and it does. The mind does get more calm. One advantage of the Buddhist approach to all of this is they consider what we call distractions as mere obstacles on the way. You can go, as I said before, over them, under them, around them, whatever. In any case, you have to leave them behind. So you can make a game of it. Okay, so like football, you can pass your intention over the heads of the opposing team, that is the bad thoughts, the obstructing thoughts, into the hands of your higher mind or intellect, which then scores. It might only score for a second, but it can score, okay? So now you don't have to actually go to war or annihilate the enemy, because I think you already know that a full-on assault only empowers your enemy more because you are putting energy into it. And why do we call it an enemy? Because, according to Krishna, let a man raise himself by his own self. Let him not debase himself, for he is himself his friend, himself his foe. To him who has conquered his base self by the divine self, his own self is the friend. But to him who has not subdued the self, his own self acts as a foe. So even Krishna was trying to shall we say, redirect Arjuna at the time from thinking that those guys out there that he was shooting at, that those were the foe. No, the real foe was his own, in himself, because he had decided that he didn't want to fight all of a sudden, even though that was his lifelong dharma. Okay, so our energy is to be directed toward the goal, and the enemy then becomes disarmed and disregarded. If you refuse to fight, how can there be an internal war? If you're a non-combatant, you're not. I'm trying to talk a little bit more about suppression. Trying to suppress things. If you don't fight, then there's no war, right? So let those things be. Make peace with that enemy within. Pacify it. Go about your business. Krishna merely directs our attention to the fact that the real enemy is not external, but internal. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about processes. Well, not more than a little bit. I have a handout for those who want it. This is just a summary of Patanjali's. I'm not going to go into great detail with it, but it's. Can you give one to everybody? Everybody who wants one, you don't have to. And for those people online, we're going to try and put these references to Patanjali's Yoga Sutras into the online program so that you can get a copy of it from there. So Patanjali concentrates on, by processes I mean, what the mind is doing. Okay, so he talks about 5 states of the mind. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but those 5 states, and he says, the first 3 are unfit to contemplate on subtle principles, and the last 2 are fit for spiritual training. So the first 3 are the dull mind, for forgetful, etc., the scattered mind, restless, the excited mind, agitated, distracted. Okay, those things are not fit to contemplate on subtle principles. So this is what most of us are dealing with, and we have to get to number 4 and 5. Number 4 being concentrated or one-pointed, that we already talked about in relation to Shikandi in the Mahabharata. And then number 5, suspended or restrained, often translated as controlled. So that means temporarily suspended. Okay. So this is what the mind is doing. Has nothing to do with the content. So, for instance, we could have. I'm just going to give one example. Content such as, I'm ruminating over the fact that when I was, 10 years old, somebody slapped me, or somebody pulled a rug out from under me, or somebody did this or something. That's not relevant. That's not relevant. Yes, everybody has been wronged at some point. There's no question of that. So it's a matter of not letting the mind dwell on that kind of thing, having it come up over and over again. Then Patanjali talks about types of knowledge, which is, again, think of it in terms of a verb, what the mind is doing. Right knowledge, which is correct perception. It's receiving information. Secondly, wrong knowledge or misperception. What it's receiving, it's misinterpreting, basically. And then verbal delusion, that is, they give the typical example is, the horns of a hare, or something like that. You can talk about it, you can draw a picture of it, but it doesn't exist in reality. Okay, so any kind of fantasies, whatever, and admittedly, a lot of these are kind of fun when it comes to storytelling and all that kind of thing, but when it comes to your own life, I don't think you really consciously want to base your life on fantasy. Then the fourth one is non-deliberate absence of thought, which they term sleep. Okay, you didn't turn it off deliberately, so it's just, fell asleep. Memory. Now this one is the big guy, because this is where the constant recycling of the same stuff comes up over and over again. So that is in storage somewhere, and our task as a housekeeper is to clean it up, to use your imagination, figure out a way to do that. Sometimes it's even good to, here's where creative imagination comes in, pretend that you're actually physically cleaning it up. I'm getting rid of these thoughts. And, you do that a little bit, and actually, they do kind of get the message. Well, let's put it this way. They disappear from your conscious mind. They will still remain in your unconscious mind, but over time, you're going to learn how to better deal with it as you go forward when it does recur. Now, the worst things are called the kleshas, or pain-bearing obstructions. See, here we have the word obstruction, which is, again, it's kind of shows the Buddhist influence on Hindu thought. Ignorance, that is lack of wisdom, a mistake about the real nature of things. Egoism. This is actually, it means like somebody with a big ego, yes, ordinary ego fills in there too, but sometimes when they use this word, they're actually, asmita, they're actually talking about somebody with a really big ego. Then, deep attachment, possessiveness, and its opposite, strong aversion. It doesn't matter what you're attached to or what you're averse to. That doesn't matter. It's the fact that your mind is doing that, and you want to train it, that's not the proper way to handle things, okay? These things don't belong to me, and or these things come to me that I would rather avoid, but it's sometimes better to just face the brute, as Swamiji used to say. You'd rather avoid it, but fate has brought it to you, you deal with it. Okay. And then the last one, of course, is the biggest one, clinging to life, resisting the ups and downs of life. It's an inability to change and move forward. It's being stuck. And this is the big one, because this is where most of us inadvertently end up. It unfortunately has this term, fear of death, in most of the books and stuff. But this is what it means. It's the death of the ego. It's not so much the death of the body, it's the death of the ego. If the ego is not there, what are we? And if we haven't prepared ourselves for that, the truth of what we really are, then we can't handle it if it flashes all of a sudden. Okay, so these are some of the, I digressed into the Yoga Sutras because there's not that much detail in the Gita. There are references. Some of these words show up, but it's helter-skelter. It's not systematized. So I wanted to bring Patanjali into the into the discussion. He's the expert. So the mind tries to deceive you. That's its playing around. Yet it's got all this stuff that it's churning around. Yet the mind is inherently self-cleansing. You have to understand that the mind doesn't really want to be that's kind of diseased, shall we say, when it's out of control, when it's just, tending toward, I don't know, maybe insanity, you could say. I don't know. But so we have this tussle going on within all the time. And our task is to get beyond the tussling stage and into the transformative stage. I think I have something missing. Okay. Okay, something is missing, but I don't know where it is. Okay. Okay. There's a quote from Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher, who was approximately lived at the same time as the Buddha in India. And he says, all misery is created by the activity of the mind. Can you let go of words and ideas and attitudes and expectations? Without those, what are you? So, reimagine yourself. This is not delusion. We have been deluded, but Swami Vivekananda says, dehypnotize yourself. Your birthright is to attain the higher self. You have the equipment built in. Thakur gives the assurance, all my wealth will be yours. He has said that over and over and over again. What is his wealth? I mean, he was dirt poor as far as on the worldly plane goes. But all his wealth is spiritual wealth. So he has left it to us as a bequeathal. Okay, I would like to then open it up if there's any questions before I close it off. I think I've lost a page here somewhere. Anyway.
There's a process, going step by step and being able to quiet the mind. If there's an intention toward dissolving the ego, isn't there a certain level of release?
Yes, you have to apply the intention over and over again. Yeah,
So it's a constant,
it's not a one-off.
but there's a constant awareness of that process. How does that not be maintained by the ego or by the mind, really, essentially? The actual expression of it.
That's true. It's almost like the mind is split. There's the mind that's messed up, and then there's the one that says, okay, I'm going to bring order to this. Okay? So yes, it's the mind sort of, in a sense, reprogramming itself. But now it's under a conscious direction. It's not because unconsciously everything will just become turbulent, kind of a mess. So when it's conscious, then we can, I've always been it's rather amazing because the people in India traditionally, I don't know about the current generations, but they always learned focus. They learned they used to live in extended families. You would sometimes have 40, 50 people maybe in the house, three, four brothers or something and their wives and three different generations and this and that. And then the students would, come home from school or something and have to do their homework, and they'd be sitting in the middle of this hustle and bustle, and they are focused on and they're not hearing this. They're focused. Now, show me any American who can do that, but that's traditionally the way they were. They learned how to, really laser focus their mind. And the more we can try and learn that on our own, the better it is. And I don't mean to say you have to absolutely ignore everything, but when you have a particular purpose and you're trying to accomplish something, the ability to focus like that is really good. Now, I'm sure you find that in law, right? I mean, you have all kinds of stuff thrown at you that you don't necessarily want to know, but you need to know, and so you have to focus on it. And anyway, so Katyayani, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was going to say I like the notes. They were very nice. They were helpful.
Oh, very good. Okay. Yeah, I hope they come through on the, she was saying the notes are very helpful. I hope they come through on the tape or the video. Okay. Anything else? Okay. He who works for me, who looks on me as the supreme, who is devoted to me, who is free from attachment, who is without hatred for any being, he comes to me, O Pandava. He who does my work, depends on me, is devoted to me, abandons all attachment or clinging, and is free from hostility toward any being, he goes to me, son of Pandu. This is Krishna's assurance, and I would, if anybody would like to take on the responsibility, there are a lot of verses in the Gita where he gives such assurances. And I have not counted them myself. If anybody would like to count them, that would be nice. So, may the bliss of nirvana be yours. That is the extinction of thought. Okay. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagatgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam.